Here we go. Sorry about that. Things were looking a little weird on my side. Just getting things checked out. Alright, let's put this down just a little bit. And go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about sort of hex mapping. I've had a request from a number of people kind of give a general overview of sort of the hex mapping system I use. Just because they're interested in it, or I guess primarily because it doesn't work quite the same as a lot of other sort of, I guess, hex map users, creators, whatever, designers, whatever you want to call them, use it in sort of like the overall sort of game space, hobby space. So I thought I'd go over it, and the most important part of it that I think really kind of makes it stand out from another number of other systems is, I guess, sort of the nesting aspect of it. It's sort of a 4-layered hex map that allows me to sort of hex map everything from an entire world all the way down to a very small area with cohesiveness, right, of scale. So yeah, let's just go ahead and hop into it. No reason to really dilly-dally around. So it basically comes in 4 hex mapping scales, like I talked about. So I basically have Atlas hexes, region hexes, county hexes, and local hexes. And basically the way it breaks down is that then each of those levels nest into each other. So you can have a number of hexes of a smaller type that make up a larger sort of super hex, and then that goes up and up, all the way up to basically your Atlas hexes, which is what I use to sort of do the full sort of map projection of the world. And of course, if you guys have been following along on the blog over on our world building process side, there's a whole tab that kind of goes through all of that, and we've done it in detail. We're sort of slowly building out a large campaign setting, the sort of personal project that you see that are like things that are like Faerun, that are like Greyhawk, that are Blackmoor, Eberron, Dark Sun, all those. The idea that you create basically a world in which you're going to end up setting game after game after game after game after game after game. And one of the things that I definitely try to make very clear early on in that process, right when you hop in, is that you should know that this is not something you do when you're prepping to start a campaign that weekend or anywhere near the future. This is sort of a background Dungeon Master, Game Master, world building project, and then as you flesh things out, or you use individual games or campaigns to actually flesh out parts of the world in a very sort of organic way, basically only adding as much detail as you need when you need it as far as the game is concerned, and then working on all the sort of like other bits of fleshing out the world sort of in the background, just sort of like DM or GM, Game Master, just sort of puttering around, just sort of having your own fun with the game that, you know, other players don't get to interact with. I guess the best place to probably start off is, we talked about the Atlas hexes, which are sort of the big hexes. So let me just kind of give you an idea of sort of like what that looks like, just sort of right off the bat. So let's go over here to our sort of workspace. There you can go. So that's sort of the very rough sort of geographic hex map of the world that I've been working on, that we've been working on over on the world building process post over on the blog. So as you can see, it's Earth-sized. But as you can see, one of the things that's kind of interesting about it is that most of the land masses are actually in the southern hemisphere instead of the northern hemisphere. We went through a whole sort of plate tectonics and building things, and how we ended up with this was a very sort of organic process. But you can see that, and then you see that there are only really just 3 large continents. So we're talking about relatively large continents compared to our own. So you're thinking of a very sort of Eurasia-sized land masses, and I think in the case of the right continent, even larger than that. This is quite large. So yeah, so each one of these hexes that's here is the Atlas hex, and that's sort of the largest size that I use. Now, one of the things that I like to do with this is that because they're nested, they're meant to work together. It allows me to sort of move between the layer scales really easily. So for this map, let's magnify a little bit. Alright. So you see over here, this is our smallest continent way over here on the left. So if you've seen some of the other videos on the channel, you've seen me actually map this. I actually went ahead and mapped this land mass to the next level down, which I knew was going to be a big project because we move map scales, basically. And you end up with, take that, and then that turns into this. So, yes, it's a lot of work. Like I said, this is not something you do. This is not something you want to do right before you want to start off a new campaign. And what you can do with this, and we're going to go over that towards the end, we're going to jump over sort of how to actually use this when you're building up a campaign. But this is something like this, where you're changing scales and you're adding a bunch of detail. It's something that you definitely want to do without a deadline of a game, right? You for games purposes, you pick like one hex, or you know, a little hex flower of like 7 hexes, and you're going to focus in specifically on that for if you need to run a campaign like now, rather than build out everything. Like that's such a slow process. But yeah, and then after that, you can see, so the red hexes here are the corners of the Atlas hexes. So that kind of informs sort of those super hexes, those regions. So that's what those hexes are, and then at each of those vertices, each of the points, so 6 points, we see those red. And that's how I know where we are on the map between the scales. And then, you know, for when we're not necessarily looking at full, you know, between scale utility, we really want to get some more detail in there. We can clean it up and it can look like this, right? Or we can fill in those red hexes, and right now we have a nice little map. And we can use this, and we can take this and we can zoom out if we want, and we can make it artistic rendering. That is one of the things we're working on. I'm working on a Dominion level, so we're looking very much on doing this sort of type of thing where we're changing scales. That's what I'm doing in the new blog, just to kind of go over the process. Even though I've sort of done it on video, just kind of show it and walk people through it, try to empty my head of all those thoughts and get them onto the paper, so you guys can basically take any of that knowledge that you want and hold on to it instead of me holding on to it. Just get it out there in the ether. So we're gonna go over that. So, but as part of that, I have one of my friends who is an artist also working on taking a map like this, a hex map, the finished sort of hex map of that, and turning that into an illustrated map. So instead, he's gonna jump in there and form all the hexes together, and then, you know, we'll have a nice little detail of like a little forest and the volcano and hopefully the castles and other things that kind of show up on them, the rivers that move around it, in a very, very cool, very fantasy map style that we're all traditional map style that we're really used to. So we can actually go back and forth. It doesn't always have to be, you know, if you don't love the look of the frankly ugly hex map, right? It's not beautiful. It's not the greatest looking thing in the world. You can either yourself or with friends, or you know, obviously you can hire a map artist too. There are many out there, and you can have them sort of take what you have. Which, if you watch my other sort of stream where we talked about how doing this allows you to sort of map making without really having a ton of art skill, which is nice. And they can take that and you can give it to somebody with some of those art skills, and they can translate it into a very lovely map for you, which is nice. But you also don't have to wait on, if you're the sort of world builder or DM or game master that feels like you need a map to run games, or to run a campaign, to have an idea of sort of like space and distance and, you know, give a groundedness to sort of the world for yourself and for the players. This allows you to do that without having to, you know, hire an artist, basically, or rely on your own, perhaps, subpar art skills. I don't know, maybe you have great art skills. If so, this isn't for you, obviously. You've got other problems, probably, I'm guessing. So let's keep moving on. Is there anything else I want to talk about this? Oh, yeah. So, obviously, we talked about the 4 different scales, right? We have the sort of atlas, the region, the county, and the local hex sizes. And each of those are different, and they zoom into each other. So like this. So this is one of the ways that it works for most of the hexes. So these little grayed out ones are sort of our border hexes. That's where hexes meet. So that hex actually covers either 2 or 3 different super hexes. So, and it helps us just sort of like knock out the boundaries so we know what the boundaries of them are when we're looking between scales. But each of those 4 levels, that atlas, that region, the county, and the local, I like it because it also ties specifically to the tiers of play for D&D 5e, but I mean, you can move it for just about anything, because it's just anything that you can break down into basically 4 tiers, it's going to work. And by that, I mean, so if you're wanting to make a sandbox for level 2 characters, you're going to go all the way, you're going to drill all the way down and just focus sort of on that local hex level. Right, and that's the hex level. It says and that means that challenges there, like the monster layers that you end up running, and wandering monsters, or those sorts of situations, those should all be geared to that sort of first tier of play, that sort of very local heroes kind of thing, where at that point you're tracking like every sort of mile they walk and things like that, where there's a lot of survivability, right? The very classic when we think about hex crawling as a campaign, where we talk about, you know, we're going to take that and we're going to drop it in a way that is... I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, I'm talking about hex mapping. So it's a very classic sort of hex map campaign sandbox setup where you're like, you have a central hub, usual town, village, something like that, and then you're exploring sort of like the miles around it. Like, that's very much feels like local style levels 1 through 4 hex crawling, you know, finding out what's around, you know, digging into very, very minor tombs and, you know, barrows, fighting the sort of monster layers you might come across would be like good 1 through 4 level sort of solo bosses like dryads, chimeras, hydras, those sorts of things, which are all cool, like, mythological monsters, right? But they're all relatively low-level monsters, and so these can be the sort of, like, big bads for, like, that local hex zone size. That sort of very, very, the smallest, most detailed level. And then, like, if you move up to the county level, right, that's the next layer up, you're talking about that's things that are in the sort of average party level for 5 to 10 for D&D 5e, that sort of second tier of play, where you're looking at adult dragons, right, the classic beholders, the warlords. That's where we get all that good D&D juice, because we know that they kind of threw most of that stuff in there between party levels 3 to 7, because that's where we know most people like to play in the game. So that's when we start seeing like all those sort of classic D&D monsters start to come out, right? Those dragons, the beholders, etc. We see a lot of those start to show up in these levels. And then if we go to the level up, at region levels, the next level up, and we start looking at, you know, monster layers are going to be like purple worms, leviathans, death knights, these sort of like also classic monsters, but also like in the very, very high level, like these are the powerful monsters that we're getting into, right? These are credible threats that most people know about. Because this, as far as the monsters are concerned, this is also a level of notoriety as well as danger. So when you talked about people, so if you talk to an average farmer in whatever settlement, they might know about the local dryad that they have an issue with, but they also probably know about sort of the closest adult dragon, right? Or even more, they've heard of like the distant purple worm, you know, off on, which is sort of like on the other side of the continent or somewhere over there. Like, they've heard, it's legendary enough that they know about it. They probably don't know any details. They probably don't even know what a purple worm looks like, but they've heard the stories of it. They might think it's a dragon, right? Worm. Whether that's, you know, spelling it with a Y, a U, or an O, right? Depending on what sort of worm it is. And then at the sort of like top level, that Atlas level, these are sort of like your world breaker monsters. These are sort of the big bads that you run into in the world, the people who have schemes that are going to, you know, affect the entire world and affect multiple planes, things like that, interdimensional kind of things. Of course, that's when we start looking at, you know, Terras, ancient dragons, liches, the big bad rogues gallery of D&D and other games. fantasy games. So because we have a scale that matches to each sort of tier of play, it makes it a lot easier, at least for me, it's been my experience, to plan campaigns. So if I know I want to run a game that's, say 4th through 7th level, then I know I really only need to sort of focus in on sort of those county and local levels, right? I don't really need to build out this entire world, that Atlas-sized world, right? Let's drop it back over there. Right? I don't need all of this, right? It helps if I zoom out. Right, I don't need all of this, right? I don't even need this, really, because we're dealing with, looking at this, we're dealing with in basically one of these small hexes. So we could be like, oh, well, I'm gonna spend that campaign. Well, it's gonna be in this little pixeled out hill section right here. That's where it's gonna be. It's where the whole campaign's gonna take place. Just because I felt like that seemed like the right spot, or I want to learn more about that part of the world, or whatever. Maybe I didn't have a very specific reason for choosing that. Maybe I just chose randomly. That works too. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that I like that it makes planning that things. And when I'm looking at, I need to drop a monster layer in, I already have a range of monsters to put within layers that make up appropriate obstacles or challenges, which doesn't always just mean that, when we're looking at, say that county level, we don't always have to pull in, the big bad doesn't always have to be an adult dragon, right? What we could do is we could actually uplift some lower CR monsters. So one of the things that I did actually, on the thing that I'm working with my friend, my artist friend, is that I didn't want to do an adult dragon. So what we actually ended up doing was I took, there's a group of young dragons together. And so instead of fighting one dragon, you might end up having to fight multiple dragons, like a handful of dragons. And that allows them as a sort of coterie, as a cabal of sort of dragons together, that they can cause a lot of mayhem all at once. It's smaller mayhem, but it's very spread out, right? Harder to handle, sort of almost guerrilla style. Yeah, you can absolutely just... Thanks, chat. You can absolutely just homer the monsters and make them stronger if you want to do that. If you need to uplift something that doesn't... That's not like dragons, which obviously scale, right? They did that in 5e where you have wormlings. You have a dragon that's appropriate for every tier of play. So if you don't want to do that, if you have something that doesn't work like that, the Dryad, there's no, super Dryad. You can just take the Dryad and escalate it up for sure. If you want to do that, you could probably also reskin a higher level druid NPC or something like that to do those sorts of things. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, most D&D monsters are too boring in the lack of range. Yeah, because if you don't have a monster that is inherently magical or doesn't use weapons, then they only do the one thing, which is basically melee, which is an unfortunate thing. It's actually one of the things that I try to avoid when I'm making monsters, is make sure that they have a few different things. So I want to make sure that they have especially if it's a boss monster, I want to make sure that we're getting a little off topic, but that's okay. I want to make sure that they have some sort of melee attack, some sort of credible melee attack, some sort of credible ranged attack, some sort of area of effect, whether that comes off of them or if that's a fireball type a grenade where you throw it and it explodes at range, and have some sort of movement power that allows them to either force movement other people or be able to move themselves, which gives them a lot more tactical advantage on the battlefield, that stops them from basically getting pushed into a corner and beat up or something like that. Gives them a lot of different options, allow them to move around, allow them to be able to attack anybody on the battlefield at any point. But yeah, so that's definitely things that you can do, is sort of upscale those. Yeah, I do know that is something that the Pathfinder is better about. The only thing that I dislike about Pathfinder, and that comes from that, is something that's very specific to 3.0 D&D and its derivatives, is that they overwent it with the D20 sort of like common core mechanic, is that then they made you build monsters the same way you build PCs, and those things don't really work the same. That's why no other edition of D&D does that, actually. Right? They don't tell you when you want to make a bad guy. They're like, oh, well, you just make a level 7 PC to challenge your level 3 PC party. Like they don't do that, but that was a very common thing in that sort of 3rd edition and derivatives. How would you do war tiles in the middle of a war? Yeah, so some of these are in contest. This is not a Dominions map, though. So this isn't a political faction map, at least at this point. The one that we're looking at specifically is a geographic map. So when it comes down to that, I basically put the borders as they would exist, probably pre-war. And then I would make a note within those hexes which are in the middle of being contested or which are being held by opposing factions during that time. Just because if I don't do that, then that's going to be a lot of map editing. If it's an active war that like the front keeps moving back and forth, then that would be different. But I also don't play or run in a game where we look at full-scale war in that sort of imperial, whether that's imperial or sort of Napoleonic sort of later fashion, where, you know, there's not nation states with standing professional armies most of the time, right? It's mostly, you know, landholders and fjords and paid mercenaries and things like that, and conflicts are significantly smaller. Oh, yep, you think the Tarrasque is not appropriately leveled? You think? I mean, I think most of the CR rating for the Tarrasque basically comes from it's just hard to kill, or to put it in a position where a permanent solution for the Tarrasque is what I should say. It makes that harder. I think that's where most of its CR comes from, and you know, legacy. So let's keep going. Oh, so one of the things I do want to talk about that is somewhat different with my my hex mapping system that I end up using most of the time is that in most hex mapping systems, well, as far as I know, all hex mapping systems either use miles, like statute miles, customary miles, imperial miles, whatever you want to call them, or kilometers. And I actually use nautical miles, which is slightly different. And I use that primarily because nautical mile fits specifically into degrees of latitude. Like, that's the measurement it's based off of. So it makes it very easy when we're talking about sort of scaling, right? That's the whole point, is that we can easily scale between hexes. We can easily scale between nautical miles and degrees of latitude and longitude because they're measured the same way, right? So when we talk about, if you ever read sort of longitude or latitude coordinates, you basically get degrees, minutes, and seconds. Those minutes, those are nautical miles, because they're 60 to 1 degree. So that's it. And then, right, you have seconds, which is the 1/60th of a nautical mile, which I'm sure there is a name for that measurement, I just don't know what it is outside of minutes. But yeah, so I like using that base, and a nautical mile, which I can, okay, there we go. Yeah, so a nautical mile is 1.15078 statute miles, normal miles, and we can also do 2 kilometer, just about 1.85 kilometers. So, you know, it's not nothing. I find it to be a good size because it works with the levels of degrees, and because we're using the hex map because we're using it this style. Right, since I'm making a world hex map, that is a 30 hex tall by 60 hex wide rectangle, which allows me to break degrees down into 6 degrees. So each Atlas hex from side to side is 6 degrees, which matches the tried and true 7 degree, 6 degree hex size that is used in most hex mapping. It's just usually in most hex maps that's either kilometers or miles. So in mine, that is, it starts out as degrees. Technically 6 degrees. And so that gives us some ability and really makes it really, really easy when I went back in and when I'm building out all the biomes for a world like this, that makes it incredibly easy to measure by 6s, because that's sort of, because it's a globe and it's 360 degrees, it's base 60 measurement, so having 6 degrees makes it very easy. Everything just works very well. It makes things easier than it would otherwise be by using that. So, yeah, I mean, like, that's sort of the basic standard that I use for, like, the world aspect, right? It works really well, things match up really well, and then we can just start drilling down. So we talked about, so like I said, each one of these hexes that we're looking at here is 360 nautical miles or 6 degrees from side to side. And then if we drop down to, right, this was our next level. So each one of these hexes, each one of these little hexes is 1 degree or 60 nautical miles from side to side. So what it ends up being is that you fit about 31 of these hexes into the super hex. So it fits pretty easily, and they all work together very, very simply. As you can see, it's very sort of, it feels very natural kind of swapping between them. And because we drop in those red hexes to sort of like be the outlines of our super hexes, it's very rare that I actually end up like losing my place or getting lost when I'm looking at it between. But if I try to reference that on a map like this where I've taken out the red hexes, things become a little bit more complicated. I also have to switch back between that map, and I'm like, wait, okay, which one is this again? Okay. Yeah, that's right. So I tend to, in play, I know it's not super aesthetic, but it is the one that I try to use the most, because it's much more utilitarian for me. Talking about the Tarrasque? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, lack of immunities. Yeah, it's just kind of a big beast in a lot of ways. Also, it's just not a very interesting enemy, right? It's just a big monster. It's not a lich. It's not a dragon. It's not particularly interesting as far as having it be sort of a Tarrasque be an end boss for like a campaign or something like that, or even an adventure. It's more like a force of nature, right? You could say the same thing about other things, like even like Leviathans, Krakens, things of that nature, even astral dreadnoughts, things like that. Like, they're just big monsters. They don't have an agenda, right? They're not villains, they're just monsters. Which is fine if you want to run I think if you wanted to, you can make them work if you wanted the campaign to really focus on it being sort of a force of nature or something like that, where it's, if you wanted to make a campaign that's a little bit more of instead of a heroic fantasy, it's more of like a disaster movie, right? Like a super volcano disaster movie, in the same way that Jurassic Park's kind of a disaster movie. Like if you reframed it into something like that, and played it with right, because that would be the nature of the game. Obviously, you play with player characters that were much lower level than, like level 20s, because things are just too easy to fix for them. Especially if you want it to be like, the Tarrasque is bad news for anybody, but the Tarrasque at that level can probably easily perma-kill somebody in one hit, I think. Depending on what level they are, I guess. Enough that it's a credible threat that you don't really want to fight it, right? You gotta figure out some way around it. right? It works a lot better as that sort of force of nature, certain doom if you fight it, sort of thing. I think it's probably where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck out of something like that. And where was I? We just talked about nautical miles, why I like nautical miles. Oh, right, and then, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I went into a little bit of a tangent about base 60 counting, which is why I use it. Okay, let's do that. So if you ever noticed that, like I said, it's 60 miles, nautical miles to a degree of longitude latitude, and that uses the base 1260 sort of standard of counting, which has used in math quite frequently over ages. This is one of the things where people complain about, like, old British currency uses that sort of 1260 counting, and that seems really confusing until you realize, because if somebody doesn't introduce it to you that way, then it looks like it's just arbitrary values. You're like, and that is how D&D used to be, where you're like, oh, just 12 of these coins makes one of these coins, and 60 do this, and 30 are this, and... But then once you realize that that's... The reason we use 12 and 60 is because they're highly divisible numbers. So, for instance, the number 60, you can divide the number 60 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. So that gives you a lot of, like, well-rounded integers. And most importantly, how many times do you need to divide something by 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? That's going to be most of the times that you're going to need to divide something is by those low numbers, which is why I like it better than 10, right? That's why a lot of 10's really good for building up, but it's not super great for dividing down. Right. If I give you something that's 10 meters long, and I'm like, okay, divide it into thirds, and you're going to be like, well, now there's the repeating, and where do I put the 4, and those sorts of things. Right, whereas if I was like, oh, we'll do it with 12 yards, and you're like, okay, well, that's 4 yards apiece. Right, the measurements just work out a little bit better, and since we're doing a lot of scaling up and scaling down, that's why it's more useful for us in the long run. This is also the same way we divide time, if you haven't noticed. Right, so we have 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute. Right, so it's something that we're very familiar with. It's just not something that we translate that knowledge usually to other aspects, like, because most math, right, we do is base 10, which is why it's a little weird. But once you start thinking about that, when it's much more useful for measuring things like circles, right? Base of a clock, a world, a sphere, right? That base 60 is just 1260 is just a lot more useful for us, especially when we're doing hand or head math. And we're not using a calculator where using a calculator that's going to take care of all the long strings of, partial digits, the remainders. That's pretty much, so talked about it. Oh yeah, so this 3060 map that I used, this is not a perfect, it's impossible to map a sphere onto a flat surface. That just is how it is. So every type of map projection, every sort of style of map doesn't really accurately depict what the world is. So this uses basically a Mercator projection, which is the one that most people are familiar with for a rectangular map. The one that makes Greenland look like it's the size of Africa, which is not true, right? But that is how it skews slightly. So it is something to keep in mind when you're looking at it, where because of the skewing aspect, everything should be slightly wider at the equator, right? So Mercator's a little weird, but it is a map projection we're very used to, so... And I'm not that worried about that much accuracy. Like, I know it does make a significant difference, but I assume in my sort of D&D fantasy worlds that people don't have a very accurate maps to begin with. So, not, not that big of a deal to me. But I can understand it being a big deal to somebody else. If so, you can start with, there are ways to generate worlds using computer imaging software, and actually some browsers do it too. Some browser programs do it, where you can make up an entire world just on a spherical projection. It just won't ever look great on the flat map, really, no matter what you do. Alright, so that's the format I use. I use that 7.6 hex format and that 1216 measuring system that lets me use degrees of longitude and latitude as well as nautical miles. So slightly different. So I may often say miles when I'm talking about measurements. If I do, unless I explicitly say I'm talking about normal miles, I'm talking about nautical miles, because I do that in my head. So it will not surprise me if I say that out loud. Just notice that I am trying to use the same the same measurement for everything. I'm not trying to switch between measurements. Alright, so when we look at this, right, so it is, we can tell, so there are 6 hexes in this row. So that's how we know that this would be 60 across, because each of these is 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Boom. And then, of course, we see the line of the super hex would continue through these sort of grayed out hexes, where they're going to be partially part of this hex and then partially part of some other super hex. But it also gives us the border of each hex, which makes it very, very helpful when we're moving between those scales, so we can keep everything straight. And usually I don't put important things or even really points of interest in those. I usually just leave them empty hexes. So that way I don't need to, at the table, I don't need to try to figure out what's in those border hexes, because I know that there's not going to be anything important for me. Just to make it easier to kind of run at the table. You could put points of interest in there. It's just, then you're going to have to use, like I said, you're going to have to end up making a map that's more like this, which, if you're looking between scales, is going to be really, really hard to figure out where you are most of the time. It's going to be hard to keep things straight. So, but in each of these, so we have our sort of gray inner hexes, and so let's talk about sort of the size. So I kind of alluded at it, but let's just go ahead and jump in. So, right, if we consider this to be this whole part right here, the whole hex, to be an atlas hex, it's 6 degrees from side to side, which we can see, right, that would be, each of these region hexes would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees, because each one's 1, right? So across, it's just 360 nautical miles, or 6 degrees longitude, latitude. And yes, I know longitude and latitude changes based off of where you are, or I should say longitude does, latitude doesn't. I'm not that concerned about accuracy, right? Otherwise, I'm going to need a calculator the entire time we play, so I'm not that worried about it. I want things to be relatively accurate, but also easy enough to keep running, right? That I don't not having to do a lot of extra work for not a lot of game. So yeah, so these are 360 nautical miles across, so it's very easy to see. You could drop this down and be like, you can hold an entire campaign in basically this one super hex and just keep drilling down in it. Let's see. So it is worth noting that between the top and bottom of this, it is 7 hexes, or 7 degrees, or 420 nautical miles. I don't usually measure things point to point, because the math doesn't scale very well once we start drilling down. We'll see that in a little bit. But at this hex level, you could count that way, because it's very simple, and you can also do it at the region hex level. But once we get into that sort of county and local hex, those measurements are going to have a lot of decimal points, so don't want to mess with that most of the time. So I just usually measure, I think most people do too, when we're measuring hexes, go across the sides rather than across the vertices of the hex. Alright, so that would be if we were looking at this as an atlas hex. Now let's move it down. and say this is a region super hex, and then each inside of these are county hexes. So a region hex, of course, like we said, is 60 nautical miles across. A county hex is 10, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, 6 of those times 10, 60. There we go. Right, so you can see that it nests very well, one size into another. Right, everything fits relatively neatly, which is what we want. And after that, we're gonna change things up, and we'll do basically the next level down. And so imagine this big, larger super hex, right, that we have. That is a county hex, right? I did Atlas to region county. Sorry. No, we are switching the templates. I'm one behind myself. So we actually use a slightly different template for that. Because if we don't, we end up with trying to make a 6 hex across for 10 miles, and that doesn't work very well. So at that point, at the sort of the lowest level, I swap down and use a slightly different template that's only 5 hexes across. Because that means that instead of having 10 divided by 6, now it's 10 divided by 5. So each of these local hexes, which are the little hexes, are 2 nautical miles across. And each of these sort of small hexes, these local hexes, the smallest ones, they're only 2 nautical miles from side to side. That is a square area of about 12.23 nautical miles, or 16 and some change square miles, or about 42 square kilometers. I like to think of it, it can be sometimes kind of hard to think about, okay, but like how much is that area-wise, like as an abstract thought. And so I like to think about it's about the same size as a 4x4 mile square. So that tells you the sort of amount of detail we can really drill down to, is that we can drill all the way down from the entire world all the way down to basically a 4x4 in that statute mile box. Right, that's basically enough to hold a village and its farmland, that sort of thing. Right, so it gives us an insane amount of detail that we can go all the way down to. Now, we're not going to, even with this project, even, looking at things like this, where we're looking like that, right, that might look insane to you. It still looks insane to me, and I already did it. It's a lot of detail that we can drill into, and remember that we would have to do this, basically, what, 2 more times? to drill down all the way. If we wanted to drill down this entire section of the world, it would be all the way down to those sort of local hex sizes. This map would be huge, right? Insanely huge. So we don't want to do that. But it does take us when we want to look at very specific areas, which is good, because so the idea is that the lower level you are when you're playing in the sandbox, the less mobility and travel options you have, right? Unless you were going out of your way to give them portals and all sorts of crazy stuff, sorts of teleportation stuff they normally wouldn't be able to do. They're basically using their feet Cadillacs, right? They're basically walking everywhere. So the idea is that you don't need a very big sandbox for that. And it's also one of the reasons why I really like the 2 nautical mile size. In addition to making the math neat, it's also really good because I consider it sort of like the in-universe distance of what we consider a league. And by that I mean sort of like the kind of medieval idea of a league, basically how far you can walk in an hour. That as a sort of like not hard mathematical measure, but sort of a general gauge of distance by how long it takes to walk to some place, right? And that works really well because 2 nautical miles is about 2 1/3 statute miles, which is pretty good for sort of like a laden backpacking pace, right? Assuming that you're an adventurer that carries gear and wears armor, you're not going to be hitting that full, 3 mile per hour standard walking pace. It's much closer to 2 miles per hour, which is I know from looking at a number of different sort of backpacking sources as well as my own sort of backpacking experience. So it's like if you are laying down and you're carrying your stuff and you're walking on, we're not talking about sort of graded, flat asphalt roads and sidewalks, right? We're talking about walking on a trail, basically, right? A footpath, which is very close to what you would be doing with something like backpacking. So it works as a very good analog. And also isn't that different between walking without a trail. Really, at that point, the trail is mainly for keeping you going to the correct destination, keeping you on track, right? Rather than making it super easy to walk there, right? Because roads get muddy, they have potholes, they're not evenly graded when they're just dirt footpaths like that. They're just now they're probably going to give you like basically the path of least resistance to whatever your destination is, right? While keeping you on track. So that's the important part of roads in my mind for sort of using this sort of system for exploration, using those 2 nautical miles. Is I think about it like that, rather than sort of other systems and that are like, oh, well, you go faster on this terrain and slower on this terrain, but that deals with differently with, I use my exploration system a little bit differently, it's structured a little bit different, which if you've watched the solo RPGs, you've seen me do that in action, where we do basically a constitution save, and that determines, you know, we roll against how many hexes we move to see when we get basically tired. Rather than look at it as sort of a finite, like, I have 8 hours to travel, I travel at this pace, I can go this far. Right? Instead, we're measuring how much effort it takes to travel, which is a slight difference, but it is a difference. Let's see, so that we talked about the backpacking, the unburdened walking speed. The other thing that I really like about this 5-wide hex in general, is that it works really well with sort of the pre-industrial spread of towns for like markets and churches and services. As we know, this phenomenon where cities are only like 10 statute miles apart, and people were trying to figure out, you know, why in the pre-industrial world are things so equidistant? Like, why are things so spread out? And I realized that it's about the travel distances, that if they are about 10 miles apart, that means that no matter where you live in between them, there's going to be a town that's 5 miles or less distance from you. Like if you were in the absolute middle, it would be 5 miles each way. Which is basically enough time to allow you to like get up, walk to the town, do the things you need to do in town, whether that's work or worship or market or whatever, and then walk home and be home, basically have a day trip. It's the distance at which we can have a comfortable day trip, basically, where we have enough daylight in the day to get up, get ready, go to a place, do the things we need to do there, and get back home all in one day, so we don't have to spend overnight in an inn or in the city or at the market or, God forbid, roughing it, you know, on the side of the road. So this works really well, right? When we're doing 2 mile hexes, that's 10 miles. So it makes it very easy to kind of look at from that aspect, to kind of know where the nearest town and where people would go and travel at that scale. Because you can just look at it and be like, okay, if it's 1 hex away, then it's a day trip. You can get there and back probably. No problem. Doing everything that you need to do there and get back. And that's a great video. It talks about it. I think this is mainly about, that video mainly talks about like Pennsylvania and maybe Ohio River Valley, where it talked about that there's just a line of towns that are all sort of similar size and similar distance, and basically I think a river valley. And we're like, why are these towns like this? And so it kind of goes into that, and why cities are certain distances apart and things like that. It's a very cool video. Definitely go check it out. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do is kind of give us a hypothetical example, I think, is probably what I want to do. Kind of jump in. So I've kind of talked about it a lot, but now maybe I should just kind of show you what that looks like, right? So before I jump into that, I'm actually going to go take a quick little bio break. I'm going to refill up my coffee, and I'll get back and we'll jump in and start taking a look at that. If that all sounds good. Alright, guys. I will be back. Alright, let's go ahead and get back to it. Turn this music down. Let's go down there. Alright, let's see. We got our stuff. Let me go ahead and... So I thought what I'd do is do sort of a hypothetical, like, assuming that I wanted to plan and run a level 1 through 20 D&D 5e campaign epic, right? Here's I've got some sort of steps outlined, and then I figured we'd kind of go through it together while I go through it, and then that way we can, you guys can kind of see the process as it works. And of course, if you guys have any questions, you can hop in and ask those as well. And I will do my best to sort of answer them as we go along. Let me get this. Maybe the easiest way to do this. This way. Here, I guess I can just show you from the outset, so that way there's no confusing. So again, I'm using the HexTML. So this is a free web program. There are a number of other ones, so find whichever one you like the best. I'm probably just more comfortable with this one, HexTML, than any other one right now, even though there is another one that I'm playing with. But I can't really affirm it as a good choice yet or not, because I don't know enough about it. So here you go, HTML playtest. So that way you can see what I'm doing, and then if you guys have any questions as we go along, of course, drop them in. So the first thing you do is, if you have noticed from my other maps, well, first thing I'm going to do is get this pointer. If you may have noticed from the other maps that we've done, this is not the orientation of hexes I use. This is probably the most common orientation that I see used for hex crawls, or for hex maps, sandboxes, or whatever. But I actually prefer having true rows as opposed to columns. Like I said, it makes the assigning biomes for like that top end of the world, when I'm really doing that top level world building, much easier if I have rows, because biomes tend to break by latitude, so up and down, so they kind of make these bands across the world for the most part, assuming you're doing natural Earth-like biomes like I am and have been. So in that case, I'm going to go over here and I want to make it that way. Next thing I'm going to do is hit this little guy up here and get a blank one. There we go. Nope, I don't need a local save. Nope, gotta change my orientation back. Next thing I'm going to do is go over here to the gear cog, and I'm going to turn off adaptive saves. I do not like it. And let's give ourselves a little room to work. Let's give ourselves let's give ourselves 30 each way. That's a good start. Let's set that size. Okay. So let's start off in like sort of this top left corner. Oop. Go back. Didn't mean to do that. All right. What? Okay. So starting off in sort of like this top left corner, the first thing we want to do. All right. So we're going to run this a level 1 to 20 epic. That's sort of what we're looking for. All right. So I need to step 1. I want to determine the starting Atlas hex biome. Right? What do we want to be sort of like the overall theme biome-wise for the campaign? That might seem kind of weird, a weird place to start, but it is the place I like to start anyways. Like, do you want the standard fantasy? Do we just want to do standard fantasy, forest? We can do that, right? We can drop one of these guys down here. If we want to maybe do a Fae or Elven campaign, we might do like a heavy forest, right? A really, really deep forest, old growth forest kind of place. Right, we can kind of choose whatever we want. If we want to go like really crazy, we could go snow-capped mountains, right? We could do a volcano, right? Volcanic island. We could start off with something like that. That'd be really cool. But what do we want to start with? We might want to do something different. Maybe we want to do something that's a little bit more like Cholt, right? Maybe we want to do a nice jungle. We can do deserts. We can do hills. Right, we have the opportunity at the start to do kind of whatever we want. I don't really have any specific plans. I didn't really think about this too much. So let's do... You know what? I want to start... I don't feel like we get a ton... I was gonna say I don't think we do a ton of wetland stuff, like some swamps or some marshes, things like that. But that could be kind of hard for a full campaign setting. That's maybe a little extra. So let's try. I'm thinking something like this. So like dense hilled jungle. I like that as an idea. That's sort of the point that we're gonna go with. And that's sort of our Atlas hex. So that's going to be our starting Atlas hex. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up... actually, I think I can pull it up here. Hold on. Our little biome diversity. Oh, I don't have it saved. I can grab it real fast. There we go. So this will be familiar. Let me show you guys what I'm looking at. This will be familiar for any of you guys real fast. Let me just, actually, you know what? This is probably going to be easier. Let me just go full screen. Boop. There you go. So those of you guys who have been watching some of the other hex mapping videos probably have seen this as being familiar. So basically we're just going to roll a quick 2d6. We're just going to do that real quick, and then we'll just kind of go clockwise around to just kind of give us an idea of sort of like the overall vibe of this area of the world, basically. Let's go 3d6. Just use the Google Dice Roller. Alright, 11. Okay, so we know that 11 is, regardless on our list, is a wetland. So what wetland will make the most sense? Well, probably a nice little swamp. So we're going to get some of those wetlands on one anyways. Let's keep going. And we're just using this off of the primary hex. Alright, we're going to go straight to mountain. Love it. We're going to diverse biomes right off the bat. So, goes a little bit higher. So we're going to change from tropical to temperate. So we're going to see some different kind of trees up there in our mountain. Oh, I should roll. One of the things I do when we get a mountain is I roll a d10 to see whether that's going to be a volcano. So if it's a 1, it's a volcano. Well, it's not. Good thing I said 1 instead of 10, I guess. Alright. 4. So on the 4, that's twice as barren. So we kind of move it back the other way so we can see if these are hills. So one down would be this normal hill, and then the next down would be these hills right here, which are sort of our chaparral. All right, let's keep going. Knock these out real quick. All right, 6. So exactly the same. 8, exactly the same. And we've got one more. Oh, and another mountain. Not a volcano, though. Right, cool. That kind of gives us a cool starting spot. So it kind of gives us an idea of sort of like the major area. So we know that if we're going to, assuming we're going to run this campaign, because it's only up to level 20, most stuff's going to take place in this sort of super hex, this one central super hex, and then we'll break it down. But if we wanted to do some other stuff in this sort of top area, in that sort of 17, 18, 19, 20 level area, then we could do that. Also at this point, like, might want to figure out who the big bad guy is, and sometimes I don't. I mean, I'll be honest, like, in most of the times when I'm running a campaign, I'm not going to try to figure that out at the start. because the likelihood that a level 1 game's going to get to level 20 is so slim, right, that the group doesn't break down at some point, that it's really not worth my while to kind of do that out of the gate. But you could. We could do that. I mean, we already talked about Jolt. We're already here, so let's just do that. I'll go over here to Hex, and then go to Content, and then I can go down here to Text and just write in here. Let's say this is a Archlich layer. There we go. And then if I go back to terrain, I can actually take this little clone stamp, or just stamp, it's not the clone stamp. And usually I use this little dragon stamp icon to denote there's a monster layer there. So now we know. Okay. And we can actually just add a little thing up here if we want to. We can just go like, hey, this is the Atlas Hex. Boom. And that's sort of the first level done. So basically after that, what we need to do is we're going to make one of these guys. And that's going to be our region for that. So we want to be that central hex. So if we wanted to. And then we could build out around it. I'm not going to do that because that'd take us a lot of time. But I could do the sides around. I could show you what that would look like at least. Usually use red for the hex sides. Let's say like 1, 2, 3. These are really easy to sort of make once you get down to it. Really easy to sort of outline by hand. So yeah, that classic honeycomb design, right? That's what we were looking for. That's what we recreated. So each of these super hexes fits these little guys right there, right? So we're just zooming in, right? That layer. We're just zooming in that layer. Let's go ahead and we can translate them just so you can kind of see what that would look like. So, right, that goes there, and then our swamp goes here. Just kind of drop them down in the central hexes. Our sort of rough Mediterranean, craggy scrubland. And our far right we have our mountain, of course. Boom, done. Super simple. Super simple. Right, and then it's just about filling them in. Right, I don't want to spend a bunch of time. We'll show you how to do, I guess, one. We'll do the central hex. And this area, so this zoomed in area that we're looking in right now, this is where we would end up spending all that levels 11 through 16, right? That's second tier. These are the sort of hexes we'd be crawling around in and the different sort of layers we do with. The other thing that we want to make sure that we do, and we'll do that here in a second, once I finish it, but we'll make sure that we need to also copy over our big bad evil Archlich layer. We'll need to make its way to somewhere within this hex, this super hex. It'll be stationed in one of these hexes as the major point of interest. So let's fill out this hex. Right, we just pull up again this our handy dandy little biome tool, and we can just roll it. We can just roll our 2d6 and we'll just kind of fill it in real quick. Alright, here we go. Alright, so we got one, and then we've got ourselves a wetland, which since it is a treed area, I usually use a swamp for that instead of a marsh. If it's a grassland area or a major hex, so basically we're diversifying the hex biomes for this area, and because if that wasn't clear, that's what we're doing. Kind of just to add that extra level of detail. But because it's primarily a forest jungle setting, so if there's going to be a wetland, I want to incorporate the trees as well, for the most part. And then this first one obviously will be, usually just go back and fill those in last. Those are all the primary hex, because ideally that should be most of what's in the hex. So that's just going to be another wetland. So like I said, I'll just kind of fill this in here. So if we want so it's two basically wetter in these hills. So we don't really have a lot of places to go. We basically go immediately we go from this hill to be heavy jungle, and would be one step, and then 2 steps it's going to be that swamp. That's how we get there. Okay, we got us to 12. That means there's water here, so we got ourselves a little freshwater hex, it looks like. Sort of a lake. Alright, so we've got one here, and then we've got our +2 Baron, which again is sort of that chaparral. So it goes through sort of like a grassy hilled area, and instead just passes straight over to sort of this rocky hilled area. They kind of busts out. You can think about it as you're going through the hills, and the sort of like craggy area kind of breaks out where the soil's really poor and it doesn't seem like anything really grows here. Or maybe it doesn't grow there because it's magical, right? We can figure that sort of stuff in when we're trying to make a campaign using that. So, but not necessarily at this point if we don't want to do that. Now, if we have an idea, you know, jot it down. Jot it down if you have an idea. Good ideas are worth their weight in gold. So don't let that slip away. So we've got 2. And then we've got some hills, and since we don't have a hill, we've got 2 regulars, so boop, boop. And then usually, so if I roll a hill on what is already supposed to be a hill, usually I just make it whatever the primary would be. So there's just a nice little valley here, a little lowland valley here, that's got it's full of some tropical jungle. Alright, we have quite a few. Alright, 4 and then +1 Baron. Alright, so we basically got 4 of these, so we went 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 less Baron would be this regular hill. So it was sort of like a green opening in the jungle. There's sort of a verdant area. It's just sort of like nice cereal grains, short shrubs. Maybe it's been cut down, right? Maybe the trees there have been cut down. And so this is sort of like new growth grasses if you want to go that route if you want. 10, which is our +2 verdant, which is going to immediately put us back into a swing. Okay, going. Like I said, I don't want to do this for everyone because this is a slow and sort of tedious process, which is why, again, I would not recommend this. Like, hey, I need to get a campaign ready for tomorrow for a new group of D&D players or whatever game you're playing. This is not for that. Like, if I had a weekend to do it, yeah, sure, I'd knock this out. But also, I probably wouldn't be focused on making it quite as detailed. This is more illustrated for you guys than necessarily what my need in the moment might be. So I'm kind of over illustrating just so you guys can understand sort of the process. That makes sense. Rolled an 11. That is wetland. Right. That's why I like this biome diversity. Is like if it's wet, there's more likely that you're gonna get a lot of wetlands and water and deep forests. And then occasionally you're gonna get a hill, which is going to be inverted, so it is just a nice little lowland valley. Alright, so we get a, oh, it'll be our first time doing that. Okay, let's do the swamp first. Alright. So swamp, and then one of the only things I don't really like about the HexML is that, so, deciduous forests, broadleaf forests, have a forest heavy, pine forests have a forest heavy, jungle does not have a jungle heavy, which is a really missed icon. Which I need, so instead I have to sort of make it up as I go. So usually I just drop one of these guys in, and then I'm going to give it this second section down here. Actually allows you to change the background of the hexes. So I might do something that's a little bit darker green like that. And then I can do that right there, and that's very pukey. Maybe a better green than that. There we go. Give us a nice little dark green that's going to show us, okay, that is, because I have to illustrate that some way. Okay, this is like deep forest, deep jungle that's really hard to cut your way through. Alright, 1. Uh-oh. Is it a volcano? No. 1, and then we got ourselves a mountain, which again pushes us up into, like in the same way, I didn't need it, but we don't have a jungle mountain tile either. I wouldn't use it, just because I like having it be, having that elevation change shown by having a different sort of biome band, right? From tropics to temperate, right? Where you're going to see different sorts of plants grow. That's a way to illustrate that. 3, okay, hills, so not hills, and then swamp. Okay, so let's do the swamp first. And hills that, of course, then become not hill, because hill is primarily what we're doing. So it just inverts. You do the same thing with the mountains. Alright, slightly more barren, so we're going to get us some plains there. And let's So I'm going to go ahead and put these guys down here. Okay, and then close again. Alright, so that's sort of, I would just do this for each of them. Again, it's not, if I was being like, I need to get this campaign ready to go, like, this week or something like that, I'd probably, and I was going to start it at level 1, I'm not going to spend all this time in the levels, you know, anything other than what I specifically need. So doing this allows me, then I can just pick one of these to be the Archlich's lair, sorry. What do we think? I kind of like this blasted out, like, trees have died area. It's either that, or because it stands out the one deepest, darkest, dankest part of the forest in this area, the deepest part of the jungle. I like either one of those. And since I can't decide, I will roll. Alright, if I roll high, it's going to be in the deep jungle. Well, I rolled low. Alright, so instead I'm going to put this, put our little Archlich layer. It's actually going down here. Do that there. Grab that, and down here I can go. Alright. Now we know exactly where that is. So, these were the Atlas hexes, and we see those transformed, and so these are, of course, making these the region hexes. And also we'd add some other points of interest in here. Now, as far as we can tell, there aren't anything around here, so I'd say that would definitely put us in sort of the wilderness camp. We could do those real quick. I think we can just go ahead and fill those out. I'm not going to fill out like the specifics of them, but just whether there would be a point of interest here or not. So this is what I would call wilds, because we don't have, in the hex or any of the adjacent hexes, we do not have any sort of cornerstones of civilization. We don't have any grand temples, we don't have any major cities, we don't have any sort of like castles, anything like that. We don't have any of those sort of major ones around. So if we're not in that hex and we're not next to that hex, we're not in the civilized lands area, we're not in the Marches Frontiers area, so we have to be in the wilderness area, which means that things are very unlikely to show up. So just kind of go through each of these and roll a d6. If I roll a 1, then there's going to be a point of interest there. And that's all we need to do. Okay. So I think just for now, the way we'll just kind of notate that, because I'm not going to go in and do like all the different types of points of interest, and this is specifically about the mapping part, and you can watch the other streams and videos we have that deals more into that sort of specific aspect. You can watch me build that up. So instead, we're just going to take these and just drop some little stars down here. Well, there's going to be a point of interest. So we know there's one there. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So we've got one here, then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. We can just keep doing that. We can just mark all the points of interest we're gonna have. 2, 3, 18. Okay. 19. We're on a streak. 20. 21. Okay. Alright. Wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That one's already got one. 19, 20, 21. So, yeah. That was disconcerting because at the beginning we rolled a bunch of 1s, but yeah, most of the time in the wilderness hexes, you're not going to have there shouldn't be many points of interest, which means that the characters probably aren't going to spend a ton of time in the wilderness. And this kind of funnels my campaign specifically, this design choice kind of funnels specifically my campaigns towards sort of the frontier regions. So you have a mixture of sort of like very civilized sorts of things, like plots and adventures that deal with people, but also plots and adventures that deal with like monsters and all sorts of weird stuff that threaten civilization. And settlements and borders and all that good stuff. Because I think that's sort of the best overall D&D vibe for fantasy adventuring. But it's also like if you wanted to run like really, really hard sort of social urban campaigns, you can definitely push and do mainly civilized things, or if you wanted to do something like this is a Wilds campaign, so this might be like a long-term traveling sort of expedition. This could be like very similar to sort of the published adventure for Cholt that sort of has the the jungle sort of hex crawl as you're trying to find the layer, right? Very similar setup like to this, which right we're sort of imitating, but not really. Where we just kind of drop a lich down in the middle of a jungle, right? And it's like, you know it's here, but you've got to find it, and then you'll level up along that, and we'll see the lich do all sorts of crazy stuff. So we have one more potential hex. There's nothing in it. Okay. And that's it. So basically, to go, so we've got the Atlas level, and now we've got that region hex level. Now, all we've got to really do is basically do exactly what we did here, this sort of hex flower, and just duplicate it again for our county level. So we just need to pick a region hex that we want to be like. This would be where they're going to spend the hex that I think is going to be the most fun for them to spend those sorts of levels 5 through 10 in. And I think if we want to do, if we really want to load in on the hexploration aspect and like the ability to go to a whole bunch of different places, I'm thinking maybe we just kind of do the central hex, because that gives us very easy access to some jungle, some hill jungle that we're already in, some grassy hills, some swamps, some deep. The only thing it's not going to give us really access to is mountains. And any of the, I mean, there's the water hex that we could go to pretty easily if we wanted to. And I do also use the, even though I didn't go over that earlier, I do kind of use these hexes, these different hex layers as basically a rough idea of travel if I just need to do some like napkin math. I'm like, okay, how long does it take them to get to this water from the central hex? Okay, so these are region hexes, so this should take about you know, maybe a month and a half, 2 months, something like that, to go that far, because remember that these are region hexes, so this is 60 miles, and then that's 60 miles, so then you need to travel 120 miles. So over rough terrain in a deep jungle, yeah, that seems about right for me. And that they're gonna really need to cut their way through that. So that would be like an entire, like probably sizable quest for somebody who's sitting in that level range. So basically we're going to kind of do this again. So I think we're just going to pick the central hex, like that's where we're going to zoom in at, and let's just for clarification, I'm going to use this little bullseye one. Okay, and that's our sort of zoom in spot. So now we know, right? That's where we're zooming in at. And so we can just do that basically again. So yeah, I mean, this whole process probably seems a little time consuming, and even doing the points of interest, like you could just estimate. That's sort of how the Welsh Piper method goes. It kind of looks at how many hexes are in here. All right, well then that's going to be 7 of this hex, 9 of this hex, 3 of this hex type, and fill it out that way. I just kind of like the procedural generation aspect of it. I like kind of not knowing anything, not really having to make any choices at that level, because I'm not super invested. That's a lot of, for me, when I'm just building a regular, just like sandbox hex map, I'm not that worried about the placement of things, because so much of that game, I feel like, at least the way that I run it, is about discovery on both sides of the screen. Like, I want to be just as surprised about like what's going to be in hexes as my players are. So I like to be surprised early on, and then think about how I was surprised, or how I maybe wasn't surprised, and how I can augment that for my players, like first time when they're gonna, like if I run across something that's not very interesting, I'll be like, oh well, maybe I'll just zhuzh that up. I'll change that up a little bit, or I'm gonna change it, or I'm gonna re-roll it, or you know, I just have a better idea. I'm just gonna put something else there. That's perfectly fine. For me, I'm like, if you have a good idea, you should run with your good idea. And so we'll just kind of copy the same hex flower, this sort of central hex flower again. That's it. So we're just kind of drilling down, right? This is a very simple process. So again, we can just do the same thing, and like I said, I'll do it again, but just because it's kind of fun. But there's not a ton to it as far as sort of filling out the biome. So again, we picked to zoom in at this region. So that's going to be here, so that's the one we'll fill out again. Though I could use any of these if I wanted to. Really like to do this activity just kind of sit down on sort of like a lazy afternoon or morning or whatever, just want to relax and just roll some dice and fill in a hex map. Very nice wind down sort of activity. Alright, so 2 and then another water. So we actually have this water connect up with here. So we actually have a kind of a sizable lake kind of going on here. It's nice. Sure we can figure out some adventure stuff to go over there. Alright, so we got one more. Let's knock that out. There we go. Same thing. Oh. Then we could just go ahead and here, color. It's FF8000, I think, right? And we can go ahead and figure out where we want to. Again, we drilled down again, so we need to take this Archlich's layer. Well, actually, we don't, because we're not focusing on that. Sorry. So we don't know of anything. We could do one of our focus. We don't have a point of interest here, actually. We have one of our surroundings. And none of our surrounding hexes have a larger point of interest. So this is very much in sort of like the wilds area. Like, there is not a lot going on here. So we're going to have to come up with a good reason why they're here. Unless they're looking for the Archlich's lair. Some sort of fabled adventuring tombs. Maybe they're on some sort of like expedition for ancient artifacts and they don't really know where they're going. Very sort of maybe like the Mummy or like Spanish Conquistador, kind of looking for treasure in the middle of the jungle, kind of Indiana Jones kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what we're looking at. We could go in and I forgot to do that guy. There we go. Now we're good. All right, and then at this point we just need to drill down one more time. We could do the points of interest. Yeah, let's go ahead and do the points of interest just to see if they're there. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna figure out what they are and fill them all out, but we can roll some dice. Remember, we have to roll a 1 because we're in sort of like the wilds area. 18. 19. Okay, so on number 20 out of 31, we finally have one. Okay. Right? I thought we'd have maybe more than that, but there's 7 plus 6, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we don't have many left. Okay, but we got one right here. 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is probably going to be the last one we have. So, like I said, I kind of, the way that set this up, that I do sort of points of interest, kind of funnels people towards sort of the frontier, because that's where the widest diversity of adventure is. But the actual largest volume of points of interest is actually in sort of like the civilized areas. The problem is that most of those POIs are very human or civilization centric. So that's when you're dealing with bandits and thieves guilds and assassins and warlords and all of those sorts of things. So they're on that side of things. Whereas in the frontier, you have a good mixture of some of those human sort of centric, civilized sort of centric things, as well as sort of like encroaching beasts and goblins and all our sort of standard fantasy tropes. And then as we get further out into sort of this wild area, we actually see that there are very few points of interest, right? Because most everything's relatively natural, and this is how most of the world is. It's mostly natural, so there's not a ton of points of interest. And then those are the types of things you're going to come across are going to be either very natural beasties, or they're going to be weird things that are out. Some weird stuff will have more incursions of things like aberrations or monstrosities and dragons. A lot more of those sorts of creatures, elementals, things like that. See a lot more of those sort of out in the wilds area. And you're going to come across less like constructs, like man-made constructs. Even humanoids, like you won't come across that many goblinoids and things like that. But yeah, those are our sort of 3 areas. And that's our county hexes. So now we need to pick a position that we want to zoom in on as far as going for our county hexes. And this is where the template changes, remember. So we're going to go from this template to from the 6 wide template to the 5 wide template, which looks just slightly different. The important thing is just remembering to change between the levels. So sometimes if I don't start there, I'll realize I'm 2 or 3 hexes in and be like, wait, that's the wrong template. Got to go back and switch. So where do we want to kind of drop in our little bullseye, our target, to kind of zoom down? So it's gonna be pretty jungly kind of thing. So do we want to start? It's gonna be jungle basically all the way down at this point. Do we want to pick something that's maybe a little less jungly? I'm thinking kind of, let me select here rather than step it. I'm kind of thinking here, because I like that this is going to give us adjacency to get to, right? If we want to do some water stuff, we can do some stuff in the lake. If we want to do some of the dry hill stuff, we have those to the northwest. We've got plenty of jungle hill. We've got some just jungle, as well as a nice big POI, capstone POI. To the southwest. I kind of like this. I kind of like this little 7 hex flower right here. So let's use that. All right. Now again, our template changes, so we're not using this template anymore. So our template's going to go to this. So it's going to look slightly different. So let's do that because they're going to make basically big triads, right? I know that there's going to be 2 here, so we'll just start it this way. All right. I'm on it. I got it. I have got it. Takes a minute for me to kind of kick that back into form. It's gonna basically make these little 3 packs, kind of this sort of Chinese checker looking kind of board design. But we need to add some more hexes at the bottom. Yeah, so there we go. So we got the same the same hex flower look, but it's slightly different, right? Slightly smaller because we're going from that 10 across rather than, versions of 6 or 12. So we said we wanted to start there, so let's go ahead and put down our things. And let's go ahead, before I forget about it, let's go ahead and get that bullseye down. Boop. And we know that that's where we're zooming in at. Alright, so those were our counting hexes. So we're zooming all the way down, and then this is sort of our local hexes. And this would be the area that we're talking about. Got the last one. This would be the area that's like our level 1 through 4 adventures are going to take place in, sort of like this area. And this is going to have, we are going to have a major point of interest over here. I don't know what that is. Let me roll a d20 because that would be important to know actually. 13. Okay. So it is not going to change sort of our point of interest filling for the rest of these because it's not a sort of civilized point of interest. It's going to be an adventurous one. That's a lot of technical jargon that you don't need to pay attention to. don't worry about what I said. It's just not going. I just needed to know the occurrences. So rather than 1 in 6, if we're in the sort of frontier region, there's a 3 in 6 chance or a 50% chance that there's going to be a point of interest in any hex. And then once you get up to basically the civilized area, 5 out of every 6 hexes are going to have some sort of point of interest in that, and most of them are going to be places and castles and fortifications and temples and very humanoid civilization-centric stuff. And there's less just ruins. There's not as many ruins and things like that. All right, so let's fill out. Which hex do we want to fill out? Let's fill out this one, since we know that there's going to be a higher level point of interest because there's one here. Let's fill out this one, and then we can kind of do that, and that we can know that that's going to be sort of like the capstone for this adventure tier as we move into the next one. Right, that we should end it by getting into basically whatever's going on with that point of interest. Should be where we should basically end the local hex level. And then once we move into that levels 5 through 10, we'll deal with that there, and then we can start off, boom, we're right there with the point of interest. Immediately working on whatever this adventure is going to be, probably. Very simple. So let's do that. We do the same thing here. We do our 2d6 table. It's very, very simple. Like, once you understand the process, it just flows very easily. Alright, so slightly heavier than that is going to be the deep forest. I'll go back and change them later. Color. 5. So slightly lighter, so that's going to be sort of do like a light forest, like it's 50% forest, 50% grass, like a dry forest. Again, it's going to be swamp, and then we have 1 standard, 2 standard, 3, 3, and then a heavy. And then I never change the primary hex, if that wasn't obvious. I never change the middle hex. So that way I always know what the primary hex. That makes it easier even when I don't keep the red guiding hexes around. If I know what the center of the hex is, that's always going to match whatever the next scale is up. So it kind of helps me figure out where I am on the map. Alright, so we've got 2 normals, and then we're going to go twice as barren. Just going to put us into grass. It's got a little meadow down there. And then a dry forest, then another meadow. Okay. And those last 2 are just... Oh. Alright, so let's do our darkened textures first, because I did not save that color. So the color's not going to be the same, but that's alright. And then the rest of this is just going to be filled up with our primary type. It's a nice forest. I like to do it. It like gives us a little bit of diversity. There's some deep areas of forest. There's nice dry areas. There's some open meadows that we can do stuff in. There's the swamp, obviously we can do stuff in. And they can come, of course, march their way over here. Right? We know that traveling between here and here is about a day, and between here and here is about a day. Makes it very easy. So yeah, if they ask the locals, hey, how do we find the lake? Because they know they're looking for a lake, but they don't know where it is. And the local will be like, oh yeah, it's like 2 days travel northeast. They can travel for 2 days, and they're probably going to hit the lake. Nice and simple. Now, here's the thing. We already know that the point of interest goes here. A nice county level one. I'll just use the little bell, I guess. I don't. Some way that we can tell that like this is different than the other points of interest, because this is actually a county level point of interest. So this is a slightly more important one. Let's say there's only one hill, and that's a good place to put things. So this hill dominates to here. And actually, what I'll do here is we'll select this here. Then I'm going to move it from text to secret notes. I'm going to be like, this is the county point of interest, and then we'll just have that as the note. So if I ever need to know anything more about that, usually I put those sorts of things in the secret notes. Like, oh, okay. So that way it doesn't cover everything up in the map with these little text boxes, but still gives me access to it, and then also allows me to show parts of this map to players without them knowing everything that's going on in each of the little points of interest. Or I can actually turn those off. There it is. Right, I can actually just show them that, and I can toggle that information on and off. Alright, let's roll for some points of interest, just to see if there's anything there. Alright, so at 5 points, we are going to have a little star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go, so we got one right there. You might also want to put more in. That's actually not a terrible idea. Might need to artificially inflate it if you're going to start a 1 through 4 campaign in the wilderness, because you might not have enough points of interest to start with for the low level, so you might want to make some up. I do that in my sort of 15-minute campaign prep. There's a video of that obviously on YouTube, and you can check that out, where I compare sort of a 10-minute and 15-minute prep. And one of the things that kind of goes through that is picking basically points of interest in each direction away from whatever your like starting settlement is, your starting location. So, there's enough choice for the players to figure out where they want to go and what they want to do. So you might want to artificially inflate that, is what I'm saying, because this might not give you enough. I say that, but we've rolled just 3 in a row, so there might actually be plenty to do here. Especially if you want to think about a point of interest as like an adventure in itself. I sometimes think of them as sort of like leveled adventures. Like once you finish this thing off, because I use milestone leveling, then you level up. Okay, so we have one more. And then I'll finish what I was talking about. Okay, no. Alright. But yeah, this is a nice little fun way to jump it up, and then you can have, right, I think about like each sort of point of interest, that's what I was thinking of, as sort of a, I use milestone leveling rather than XP leveling. So killing monsters isn't going to make you any more powerful. Getting treasure necessarily isn't going to make you more powerful. It's sort of like engaging with the world and doing things in the world is what gets you fame, gets you notoriety, allows you to level up. That's just sort of how I run my game. So if you're engaging with the world and you're doing things, whether you're chasing your own interests as a player character, that character's bringing their own agenda and things they want to do, which is very hex crawly, right? Their own sort of agenda. Or if you guys are engaging with sort of what's going on in the world, like those sort of world events that kind of go on, completing things around either one of those is going to get you, in my mind, milestone XP. Very easy to tie just like one adventure location to a level. So that would give us at least 3 before we start dealing with this county hex one. But I can also add more. You might want to do an introductory adventure. So we did our starting Atlas hex biome. We did that top level point of interest. Which was our big bad lich layer, and then we just sort of started building down. Yeah, so I mean, it's just really stepped. There's like 8 steps to it. So I'll just read off the steps. We went through them, but I didn't read off the steps. That's what we were doing, man. Basically, determine that starting Atlas hex biome. We did that, right? That was the first thing we did up in the corner, right? That's in this top left corner. That's the first thing we did. And after that, we just moved that on. Step 2 is move that on to the region hex level scale, right? That hex flower, and then fill that out. And then we just kind of repeat those steps, that step 2 and 3. You know, filling out these biomes, right? That's sort of, so we make that top level biome, we copy that information down, we fill in those things, and we roll for those potential biomes, and then we just do that again at the next level down. So we go Atlas to region, right? That was that first level, and then we just do the same thing from region to county. Do that same thing with the 2d6 biome variation table, and then assign some POIs, and then we just do. We're gonna do that once more, and actually, this is where I put in my notes the steps a little different. I talked about sideways, and then basically once I get down to that part, I can either do it like we did, or I use my 15-minute sort of campaign start that I talked about, where I just build that very quickly. 3 relevant sort of like nearby points of interest, some adventure seeds, I toss it all out. Again, go watch that video if you want to, of that. And that's what I recommend, like, hey, if I need to start a campaign today and or this weekend or whatever, like that, I would say use that. That is way faster. That's going to get you from nothing to being ready to play the fastest for like a session 1. So definitely use that instead. That's definitely something you can sit down and bang out like the afternoon before the game very easily. Like I said, it takes me, you know, somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes to use it usually, to kind of get whatever I need to feel pretty confident to run into that first session. And then I can also do some fleshing out, you know, map stuff and NPC stuff and that sort of things. But that 15-minute thing will get me where I need to be ready to run a game as fast as possible. And so to finish, this is sort of like the 8th final step. To finish the sort of jumpstart campaigns, usually what I do is I like to run a pre-made adventure. So I can do, just like we were talking about, I can fill out some of this more stuff on the map and more points of interest, build out those a little bit more, and I can spend my prep time doing that rather than spending my time prepping the first few sessions, basically. So usually I pick an adventure module that I'm pretty familiar with, that I know is probably going to run about 2 or 3 sessions. So that'll give me a few weeks before I really need to start prepping custom content per each game session that I can instead use to sort of like fill up the background stuff. As I learn more information about the characters, sort of incorporate them into the world and sort of figure out how I want to maybe tie their backstories into things, that sort of stuff. It kind of gives me the elbow room to kind of work on those things first. And then I can switch off once they finish that first sort of like pre-made published adventure and focus specifically on that and start incorporating the things that I just worked on over the last, you know, couple of weeks or whatever. Start folding that into the gameplay. Obviously, what we just looked at was doing something that was going to be like right, this is meant to do like a full 1 to 20 run. Right, that's what we built it out, but that's not what you're going to need for most. This is like the most I would spend to work on something just sort of right out the box for a level, if I was even proposing that we're going to run a level 1 to 20 campaign. That's sort of what I would make to get us started. But the truth is that you might be in sort of the normal D&D area where we know that most D&D play happens between like levels 3 and 7. And so anything that's from level 1 to 10, you only need to focus on these last 2 parts. Right? That's all you need. You can pick one of these county hexes, make a little county hex flower, and pick a spot and be like, okay, this is where the like CR, whatever that's going to be, like CR 14 solo big bad evil guy is going to be. And then, alright, here are some other adventure locations that are sort of around that they can deal with before they get there, and then you can start to sort of like tie those together as maybe sort of a faction or an organization. And then drill down to this last flower and then pick a pre-made adventure that's maybe going to, where you can swap a few things out that are going to kind of tie into that big bad evil guy villain thing. You can tie into that, you can tie into backstories and fill out with some of these other points of interest around here as you fill out more of this map, and tie those points of interest into that first campaign or into the characters' backstories, and give them a reason to go to different places or an idea of where different places are that's relevant to the plot and the factions and their own backgrounds. And it allows you to just kind of make that very organically, very easily. And right, you can sit down and knock that out in probably an afternoon and have almost an entire campaign, kind of at least the rough framework of one knocked out pretty easily, while still allowing you like a lot of flexibility. Like if your players get in there and they get 5 sessions deep and decide that they want to do something completely different, you don't feel like you've wasted a lot of time, and then you feel like you still have this sandbox that can adapt to whatever direction they feel like they want to take the game at that point. Like if they, rather than being like, oh well, we'll end this campaign and then just I'll do this all over again, you can just kind of pivot the campaign. Like that's one of the strengths of the sandbox type, right? Is that you can just kind of pivot the campaign to focus more on what turns out they're more interested in than maybe the original game idea. Or you can railroad them, I guess, towards whatever pre-established campaign you already have in mind. That's going to depend. That's between you and your players, though, and how you guys feel about that. So, right, you can really see the detail, right? We went from bam, that, down, when you can look at, like, this is the entire world map. If you look at that, right, this is the entire world map, and I can zoom in anywhere on this map pretty easily to about a 4 mile by 4 mile square. And I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly impressive to be able to do as a system, very easily, right, without too much work, right, way less work than it feels like it should be. And you only need to fill in that hyper detail whenever you're gonna run specifically low level stuff there, right? Otherwise you don't really need to know that, right? Here's the thing is that like your level 16 party doesn't need to know where the nearest small village is. They don't care, right? But your level 1 party probably wants to know where the nearest, hamlet is, where they can like get some more food and things like that, right? Different levels of play, different styles of play, kind of. Your level 16 party is probably looking at major cities at that point, right? That's where they stop. That's where they consider stopping off at, not random villages. We don't need to play out then. If for some reason at level 16 they were still walking along roads, which they're not, right? They're teleporting and doing all sorts of wild stuff by that point. But assuming that they were walking, right? We don't need to play out like every single little village they stop in, every inn they stop in. These aren't the sort of people, level 16 parties, not the sort of people to get ambushed by, CR 1/2 bandits, right? Those are the sort of people they clock them coming down the road and you're like, well, we're not messing with them. We're just going to let them move on by. Right. So the threat level's different. So that's where you focus the game on. Playing out. I think it's Mighty 9, right? It's campaign 2 of Critical Role, where they have the bandits that keep showing up and getting the snot kicked out of them by the Mighty 9. That sort of thing. So if you want to like have a comedic like side effect, but like that's not a real combat right there. It's not a real combat. That doesn't actually threaten some level 15, 16 characters. Right, so explaining like how much you need. So if you guys have followed my solo RPG series, you know that we really only work with sort of like the local and county hexes at that point. right? Leah kind of just jumps between Split Valley Oasis and the Carjuntan County sort of major hexes, super hexes. So we very much play in that sort of low level, and we've been doing that for, what, 30-something sessions? And at least for me, it still feels very fresh. We're still finding things out, we're still discovering places and doing things and running into all sorts of mischief and all sorts of crazy adventures, right? And we still don't feel like, even though we've been doing it for sessions and sessions, that we, or at least I don't feel like, I have even a super strong knowledge of the surrounding area for either one of those sections, Split Valley Oasis or Carjuntan. I mean, other than some of the places we went to previously in that campaign, like Dren's Keep and the Water Myrmidon Shrine, and that sort of the ruins of the other keep, and like we have some places we've been to, locations, but sort of broader context of like knowing the area, right? We don't, which is fun, right? There's always stuff to discover still, even in those small sandboxes. Hopefully that makes the sort of understanding and watching me do it, whether that's in the solo RPG or whether you want to try it for your own campaigns, which I highly suggest. It's a lot of fun, super easy to sort of implement using whatever biome systems and whatever different sort of like travel systems or anything you want. If you're just looking specifically for a mapping solution, I think it works pretty well, and allows you to scale like way out and way in, which I think is really useful. Especially if you're wanting to do like we're doing over on the world building process blogs side, where we're building out sort of like a Faerun, like a place where it's like we are going to set lots and lots of games in this place for like years and years to come, right? If that's the sort of thing that interests you as a dungeon master or game master, then this is definitely something you should check out. I even like sort of using things like this that you can even incorporate into sort of like narrative style campaigns. If you just want to add a little variety every once in a while, like you can run a very sort of standard maybe like adventure path, maybe you want to put together a handful of published modules, and you can take those modules and kind of drop them into this sort of sandbox style setting for whatever the appropriate tier of play is that you're doing, and just kind of gives you a little variety, adds a little like exploration, travel, make that area of the game a little bit meatier, so it's not just like we finish dungeon, teleport to the next dungeon, right? If you want to flesh out sort of a little bit of a world, a little bit of a setting actually around this maybe string of dungeons that you're planning on running, like this sort of hex mapping style, I think will work really, really well for that, because it's really based around the sort of points of interest. So you can just take a point of interest, drop it in, build out some stuff around it, add some settlements, add some different areas, fill out those points of interest, and then that can give them places to go to during the quest and in between quests, and maybe just some fun stuff they can do on their own if you want to just kind of switch it up and maybe do a little bit more explory, crawly kind of style game, just as sort of like a palate cleanser, right, between dungeon delves or something like that, or even like very high urban if you want an urban campaign, just every once in a while have them like head out of the city and go do like a more standard adventure, like location dungeon kind of adventure, and they can travel back and kind of go on with things, just so there's variety. I like to think that, yeah, steak's great, but I don't want to eat steak for every meal, right? A good steak's good, but maybe not for every single meal every single day, right? So just a little bit of variety, that sort of thing, kind of highlights and makes the meat stand out even better, right? Even more. So, of course, if you guys enjoyed this, make sure and leave it a nice little like, right? You want to do that. That always helps out the channel. And the other things you can do, of course, you can go over to DriveThruRPG. We've got some pay what you want downloads. If you want to support monetarily, you can do things that way. Or jump over to the Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/RedRaggedFiend. Go over there, you can do a one-time donation setup if you want. That's always appreciated. That sort of stuff kind of goes into buying new materials for the streams and stuff like that, and lets me know what you guys are sort of like interested in seeing in the future. Let's see, other things, make sure you check out the blog for more in-depth stuff, especially if you want more in-depth on the mapping and the world building aspect. That is the place to go. That's redraggedfiend.com. You can go get everything there. as well as lots of other Dungeon Master, Game Master, primarily sort of stuff for D&D and other tabletop RPGs as well. Let's see, anything else we need to talk about? I think that is it. Subscribe if you haven't. Of course, if you don't have some dollars to drop and you want to support me some other way, liking and sharing helps a ton. Share this video or the channel or the blog or whatever you feel like is the most fun, is the most useful thing that you've found, and share that on social media, on Reddit, on Ian, or your other sort of like preferred tabletop RPG forum. But otherwise, I think that's it. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys got the information out of it, and you feel like you have a better handle on sort of the understanding what I'm doing with hex mapping, which, granted, right, there's a lot going on, I guess. But yeah, no, that's gonna be it for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next time, alright? Bye!